Something strange is happening in the darkness above us, far beyond the reach of ordinary telescopes and the thin blue veil of our own sky. A visitor drifts through the deep. We've given it a name, Three-Eye Atlas, but naming something does not mean we understand it. In truth, this visitor is more of a mystery than an object. It behaves in ways that break our expectations, as if it belongs to a different set of rules entirely. You can imagine yourself now lying somewhere quiet, perhaps outside where the air is cool. Above you stretch the night, calm and endless. Somewhere within that velvet spread, faint and distant, a point of light moves slowly through the dark. That's where Three-Eye Atlas is, a traveler between stars, crossing the long dark road that connects one world to another. Astronomers first spotted it by accident, as they often do, a tiny shimmer against the black, moving too steadily to be a star and too strangely to be a simple comet. They traced its path, ran the numbers again and again, and the more they looked, the less sense it made. At first, they thought it might be like Oumuamua, that long, tumbling shard of interstellar rock that passed through our solar system a few years ago. Then maybe it was like Borisov, another wanderer from the spaces between stars. But no, Three-Eye Atlas didn't fit either pattern. It glowed in colors it shouldn't. It gave off gases it wasn't supposed to have. And the way it moved, smooth, steady, unchanging, was nothing like what natural objects tend to do. Even the way we found it seems almost intentional. The best photographs we have came from a team of astrophotographers in Namibia, a vast, quiet desert in the southern part of Africa, where the sky is so dark that you can see the curve of the Milky Way like a silver river. On the night they captured it, the Earth's shadow was crossing the moon, a lunar eclipse. The light from the sun was blocked, the world below dimmed, and the sky became blacker than black. It was the perfect chance to see deeper. They could have pointed their cameras anywhere, toward distant nebulae or the arcs of ancient constellations, but instead they turned them toward this visitor. And when the images came back, there it was, a glowing green shape, soft and luminous, floating against the stars. Now, green is not a new color for comets. We've seen comets turn green before. Usually it's a sign of chemistry, the dance of sunlight with molecules on the comet's surface. Ultraviolet radiation breaks apart carbon chains, freeing diatomic carbon, which glows that signature green when energized. But here's the problem. Three-Eye Atlas doesn't have those carbon chains. None of the instruments that have scanned it, from Hawaii to Chile to the orbiting telescopes above, have found the spectral fingerprints of those molecules. No diatomic carbon, no C2, so why is it green? That's what keeps the astronomers up at night. They've ruled out most of the usual answers. Maybe it's some kind of reaction involving carbon dioxide, CO2, which is present in large amounts around Three-Eye Atlas. But CO2 doesn't glow green. Makes the comet bright, yes, but not like this. The glow seems unnatural in its steadiness, too constant, too deliberate. You might imagine it now, that strange green shimmer drifting silently through the dark. No engine roar, no signal, just light. A soft, steady pulse that whispers across the void. And yet the oddities don't end there. If this object were an ordinary comet, it would be mostly ice and dust, fragile, ancient, shaped by the light of distant suns. As it approaches ours, it should begin to change. The heat should cause it to shed layers, creating bursts of gas that push it slightly off course. This is what we call non-gravitational acceleration. Tiny pushes from sublimating ice that nudge the comet along its path. But Three-Eye Atlas doesn't do that. Since the day it was discovered, its course has remained almost perfectly stable. From early spring through autumn, it has neither sped up nor slowed down by any meaningful amount. The path it follows through the solar system could be drawn with a ruler, smooth, steady, intentional. That's not how comets behave. Even the largest, slowest ones we know, like Hale-Bopp, a massive, icy giant that dazzled our skies in the 90s, drift and wobble a little each day as sunlight pushes against them. But 3i Atlas stays true to its course, almost like something that's steering itself. Astronomers hesitate to say such things aloud. The word alien hangs heavy in science, too loaded with imagination and too far from proof. But the thought lingers anyway, whispered between lines of data and cautious papers. What if it's not a comet? What if it's something else?
Something built, not born?
There's another puzzle too, one hidden inside its faint halo of gases. Among the readings of water vapor and carbon dioxide, scientists found traces of nickel. Normally, metals like nickel only appear when a comet passes close to the sun, where the heat can vaporize them. But 3i Atlas was far from the sun when the metal signature appeared. Out beyond the orbit of Mars, too cold for such things to happen naturally. Some joked that it was a spacecraft and the nickel came from its engines. After all, nickel is used in strong metal alloys, the kind that can withstand heat and pressure, the kind used in rocket construction. And when those engines burn, they release gases rich in carbon dioxide and traces of nickel, just like what we're seeing now. Of course, it's only a joke, mostly. But in every joke, there's a tiny piece of truth, or at least of curiosity.
Because the longer we watch this thing, the stranger it gets.
If it were a rocket, it should behave like one. If it were a comet, it would shed and twist and change its path. But it doesn't. It just glides, smooth, controlled. You could almost imagine a silent awareness guiding it. Not a mind in the human sense, but perhaps an ancient intelligence, long gone, that left something behind. Something wandering, something waiting to be found. And that thought alone is enough to make anyone stare a little longer into the night sky, wondering. In the data, scientists can see that 3i Atlas is on a trajectory that will take it behind the sun soon. On the far side, it will disappear from our view, hidden in the blinding glare of light. When it emerges again, no one can say for sure what we'll see. Maybe it will look the same. Maybe it will have changed course or dimmed or flared. Maybe it won't come back at all. And there's one more strange coincidence, a detail that some scientists mention only quietly. When researchers calculated the object's path backward through space, tracing where it might have come from, the line pointed toward the constellation Sagittarius, a bright cluster of stars near the center of our galaxy. That might not mean much on its own, except Sagittarius is also the direction from which another mystery once came. It was the year 1977. A massive radio telescope in Ohio, nicknamed the Big Ear, caught a signal unlike any other. A single powerful radio pulse, narrow, precise, and strong, that lasted for just 72 seconds. When the astronomer Jerry Amon saw the data printout, he circled it and wrote one word in the margin: wow.
That's what it became known as, the wow signal.
It was never repeated.
Never explained.
And it came from the direction of Sagittarius. No one can say it's connected to 3i Atlas. Coincidences happen in the vastness of space. But when astronomers reverse-engineered the path of 3i Atlas, they realized that around the same time that signal reached Earth, this object would have been near the outer edge of our solar system, far beyond Pluto, gliding quietly in the dark.
Maybe that's all it is, a coincidence.
Or maybe, just maybe, it was saying hello. You can feel your breath slowing now, listening to the rhythm of the thought.
The idea doesn't need to be frightening.
It's more a reminder of how vast, how mysterious, and how alive the universe might be. Whether 3i Atlas is rock or relic, comet or craft, it is a traveler.
A visitor from somewhere beyond our imagination.
And as it drifts closer, we are reminded that the unknown is not something to fear, it's something to wonder at. Somewhere out there, in the green glow of a strange light, a mystery is still unfolding.
And maybe, just maybe, it's watching us too.
When astronomers talk about 3i Atlas now, they often lower their voices as though the object can somehow hear them.
It's not superstition, not really, more like quiet respect.
After all, it's not every day that something from another star system drifts right through our cosmic backyard. You can picture it. The the long black of space stretching outward forever with 3i Atlas gliding through it, a pale green ember against the endless dark.
Round it hangs a halo, the coma, faint and ghost-like.
The tail stretches behind, pointing away from the sun, but it isn't like other tails we've seen. It flickers, reshapes itself, almost alive in its movement. For months, scientists have been watching it, tracing its light, waiting for it to behave like a normal comet. But it never quite does. One night, deep in the desert observatory of Chile's Atacama region, a small team of astronomers gathered to take another look. The air was thin and cold, the kind that carries sound sharply, but holds silence even better. The sky above them was pure and unbroken. They turned their great glass eyes, telescopes the size of small houses, toward the coordinates of 3i Atlas, expecting to see what they had always seen. Instead, the image that appeared on the monitor made one of them lean closer and whisper a single word: different. The green light was brighter. Not by much, just enough that it seemed
deliberate,
like a lantern turning slightly toward them. The team recalibrated, checked the data twice, then 3 times. The readings held steady, no errors. The brightness wasn't caused by a flare from the sun, nor by any passing cloud of cosmic dust. The glow of 3i Atlas had genuinely intensified, and not gradually, not like natural heating. It brightened in a sudden, clean step, almost as if it had noticed something. But of course it hadn't. Objects don't notice things.
At least not the way we do.
Still, the thought lingered in that control room, quiet and heavy. No one wanted to be the first to laugh it away. Later, when the data was sent out to other observatories, Hawaii, Spain, Arizona, the same thing was confirmed. 3i Atlas had changed and no one could explain why. You could almost imagine the scientists scattered across the world, all looking up at the same spot in the sky that night, thousands of miles apart, but bound together by one shared feeling, curiosity laced with unease.
What is this thing?
The early theory was simple enough. Maybe a burst of gas from deep inside the object had vented suddenly, like a breath escaping from an unseen crack. That could brighten it for a while. But if that had happened, its path should have shifted slightly, even by a fraction of a kilometer per second. Yet, when astronomers recalculated its trajectory, it was as straight and stable as ever. No change. That's the part that unsettled everyone the most. You see, comets are messy creatures. They wobble, they spin, they hiccup their way through space.
A burst like that would have nudged it even a little, and that didn't happen.
Instead, it brightened cleanly, then stayed perfectly on course. You can imagine if you were lying under the night sky right now, looking up through the still air, that same eerie steadiness. A glowing green light moving at impossible calm through the infinite dark. It's strange how a thing can be both beautiful and unsettling at the same time. 3i Atlas reminds us of that.
It isn't frightening exactly. It's quiet.
Too quiet. And silence has a way of drawing out thoughts we try not to think. There's an idea that every civilization, if it survives long enough, eventually sends something out into the dark. A probe, a vessel, a message in the cosmic sea. Maybe 3i Atlas is one of those. Maybe it was launched 1 million years ago by someone we'll never meet, crossing the space between suns until, by some delicate cosmic coincidence, it wandered near us. If that were true, then what we see now could be more than a comet. It could be the last trace of another world's curiosity. A question flung into eternity, still drifting toward an answer. That's the poetic version. The scientific one, as always, is more restrained. The European Southern Observatory has been cataloguing every particle of light it can gather from this object. Their instruments show strong carbon dioxide, faint traces of water, metals that shouldn't be exposed at this distance from the sun, nickel, iron, all things that belong deep inside, not on the surface. But somehow they're there, spread across the coma like glittering dust. Nickel in particular catches the eye. It's an element we know well. It forms the skeletons of engines, the skin of spacecraft. It holds its strength under heat. It resists corrosion. It's what you choose when you want something to last. No one dares say what they're thinking when those readings come through, but you can sense it in their reports. The careful wording, the hesitant phrasing, all of it hiding a quiet spark of wonder.
And then there's the movement again.
When scientists mapped its path forward, they realized that by early next year, 3I Atlas would pass behind the Sun, hidden from our view for weeks.
That's normal enough.
But what caught attention was the prediction that afterward it would emerge closer to us than expected, a slight shift in its orbit, one that didn't seem caused by gravity alone.
Maybe it's nothing.
Maybe it's a small calculation error. Or maybe, and this is the thought that no one says aloud, maybe it intends to be seen.
That word, intent, it is dangerous in science.
It implies will. It implies purpose. And yet it also stirs something deep inside the human mind. We've always wondered if we're alone. Always looked at the stars and asked if someone else might be looking back. 3I Atlas gives that question shape.
A real glowing shape moving slowly through the night.
It's strange how, even now, after all our technology and exploration, we still know so little about what drifts between the stars.
Space isn't empty.
It's full of secrets we haven't yet learned to read. There's a quiet sort of humility in that, to know that we are still beginners, still children staring into the dark, trying to make sense of the flickers we see. And somewhere out there, this green traveller continues on. The last reports from the Namibian team mentioned that during the lunar eclipse, their long exposures revealed something new, faint ripples in the tail of 3I Atlas, like waves moving through smoke. The pattern wasn't random. It repeated. Soft, rhythmic pulses, almost like a heartbeat. They tried to analyze the interval between the waves. The timing didn't match any known natural oscillation. It wasn't the spin of the nucleus, nor the solar wind's rhythm, nor any vibration of the instruments. Just a soft, consistent pattern.
1, 2, pause. 1, 2, pause. Someone joked that maybe it was Morse code. Another said maybe it was breathing.
But in truth, no one knows what it means. You can imagine that image now. A soft green comet, its tail rippling faintly like a flag in the unseen wind, whispering a pattern that no one yet understands. If it is just rock and gas, then nature has crafted something eerily precise. If it's something else, something made, then we are witnessing the slow drift of an ancient wonder. Some nights the thought of that makes sleep come easier. The idea that we might not be alone doesn't have to be frightening. It can be comforting, like knowing that somewhere out there, in the vastness we can barely comprehend, there are others who once looked up at their own night sky and wondered too. And maybe across the endless dark their wonder reached us at last. For now, 3I Atlas keeps gliding. Its green glow continues to hum in the silence. Its path remains steady, perfect, unbroken. The instruments keep watching. The telescopes keep turning. And somewhere deep in the back of every astronomer's mind is a question that won't go away. What if it knows we're watching? When an object like 3I Atlas drifts behind the Sun, it feels like a kind of curtain falls. The telescopes fall silent one by one, their feeds dimming into static, and for a while, no one on Earth can see it. It's there, still moving, still glowing somewhere on the other side, but hidden, like a thought you almost remember but can't quite catch. Astronomers call this period solar conjunction, when the Sun blocks our line of sight. For most comets, it's just a pause in observation, a few weeks without data before they swing back into view. But this time it feels different, because 3I Atlas is different. Its last recorded brightness before vanishing was higher than expected, almost like it was gathering light to take with it. Some of the images even showed faint filaments stretching outward, glowing threads of gas or dust that didn't behave the way they should. They curved toward the Sun instead of away from it. That detail unsettled the scientists who saw it. Tails are supposed to follow predictable laws. Solar radiation pushes material away from the Sun, always outward, like a wind blowing across a field of dust. But this tail bending inward, meant something else was at play.
Was it magnetic fields? An unknown particle interaction?
Or maybe something within 3I Atlas itself acting against the flow.
No one could say for sure.
The last picture from the Hubble telescope before the blackout showed the object half lit, its bright green halo melting into darkness as it moved into the glare. It looked almost alive. Some said it looked like an eye closing. For weeks after that, Earth waited. The observatories turned their instruments toward other parts of the sky, but there was a quiet tension in every lab, the kind that hums beneath conversation. People didn't say it aloud, but they were counting the days. How long until it comes back? Somewhere in that waiting, theories began to bloom like strange flowers. In one online astronomy forum, a user posted an animated graph of 3I Atlas's expected reappearance. "It's going to emerge closer than it should," they wrote. "The math doesn't add up." Thousands of comments followed. Some were practical. Calculations, orbital models, comparisons with Borisov and Oumuamua. Others wandered into questions that felt more like stories. What if it isn't coming back the way it left? What if it's slowing down?
What if it's waiting?
Most scientists ignored those ideas, gently, professionally. Space is full of strange coincidences and human minds are full of pattern-seeking. But even the skeptics couldn't deny the unease that came with the silence. Meanwhile, in the high desert of New Mexico, at a small observatory perched on a ridge, a group of graduate students decided to keep watching anyway. The sun might have hidden 3I Atlas, but there were indirect ways to trace it: gravitational effects, tiny shifts in background starlight, solar wind disturbances. Night after night, they logged data, mostly quiet, mostly uneventful. Then about 2 weeks after the conjunction began, one of the instruments picked up a faint signal, a ripple in solar particles that didn't match any known coronal event. It was subtle, like a whisper through static. At first they thought it was a glitch. Then another observatory in Spain reported a similar reading, recorded only minutes apart. A ripple moving away from the sun.
Not explosive like a solar flare, not random like background noise.
Just a slow, steady pulse. Somewhere in the middle of that pulse, there was a strange consistency, a repeating interval. 3 beats, then pause. 3 beats, then pause. When they plotted it out, the pattern matched almost perfectly with the rippling rhythm the Namibian team had seen in 3I Atlas's tail weeks earlier. It was faint, it was quiet, but it was there.
Now, no one dared call it a signal. That word carries too much weight.
But the coincidence of timing was impossible to ignore. The story spread quietly through the astronomy community, not through official channels, but through messages and private calls, scientists asking each other in hushed voices, "Have you seen the pattern?" Some said it was nothing, just solar noise that happened to line up by chance.
Others weren't so sure.
You can imagine that hush across observatories, rooms dimly lit by monitor screens, coffee cooling on desks, people leaning close to graphs, tracing invisible connections with their fingers. The waiting stretched on. The Earth kept turning. Seasons began to shift. And then, almost like a breath, returning after a long pause, a signal came through.
3I Atlas was visible again.
It reappeared just before dawn in late December, faint but distinct, a small green spark against the silver wash of morning. But it wasn't where it should have been. Its position was slightly off. Not much, in that only a small drift from its predicted course, but enough to make every scientist pause. Its brightness had changed again too. Not dimmer, not brighter, different. The light was steadier, more concentrated, as if something inside the object had grown denser or smoother. And then came the strangest part. In the first long exposure images taken by the VLT in Chile, the tail of 3I Atlas was no longer one stream. It had split. 2 distinct trails stretched out behind it, crossing each other like threads. One pointed away from the sun, as expected. The other curved faintly toward the direction of Earth. The news spread fast, faster than any telescope could confirm. Within hours, online headlines were calling it the comet that points back. That's not what scientists said, of course. They preferred terms like dual plume emission or anomalous dust trajectory, but the phrase stuck. The comet that points back. For a while, everyone was looking up again. Even people who had forgotten about 3i Atlas for months began asking questions.
What's happening out there? Why does it look like that?
At a press conference, one researcher tried to explain it's likely that differential heating along its surface is causing complex outgassing behavior. But even as he spoke, his voice carried uncertainty, because there was another theory quietly circulating, one that couldn't be easily published in a journal. What if the direction of the second tail wasn't a coincidence? What if somehow it was a response? There's a strange comfort in the way humans reach for meaning, even in the vast, indifferent dark of space. Maybe that's what keeps us watching. Not just the data, but the possibility. And so, when 3i Atlas finally cleared the sun and revealed its full form again, there was a collective inhale across every observatory on Earth. It was bigger. The coma had expanded, shimmering brighter than before, the green light now tinged faintly with gold. For a moment, it looked less like a comet and more like a lantern, a slow, glowing vessel drifting through the dark, gathering sunlight, carrying it onward. And though everyone would deny it later, some of the astronomers watching that feed from around the world said they felt something they couldn't quite describe.
Not fear, not awe.
Something closer to recognition, like seeing a familiar face in a crowd, one you can't place but somehow know. When 3i Atlas came back into view, it was like waking up from a long, uncertain dream. The telescopes that had been silent for months flickered back to life. Screens glowed again in darkened labs. Across observatories scattered from Chile to Hawaii, people leaned in close to their monitors, holding their breath. And there it was. Still green, still beautiful, still impossible. The object wasn't just reflecting light now, it was emitting it in a way no one could quite explain. The glow was smoother, steadier, almost pulsing if you stared long enough. Some images showed faint waves rippling through the coma, like rings moving across the surface of still water. Dr. Seligman, one of the first astronomers to confirm its interstellar origin, was among the first to notice something odd in the reappearance data. "It's brighter than expected," he said quietly during a call with his colleagues. By a factor of nearly 2, someone on the line asked if it could be an error in exposure calibration. He checked again.
No, the numbers were clean.
That brightness wasn't a glitch. It was real. And then came another surprise. When they plotted its trajectory, the orbital path had slightly shifted. Not by much, just a subtle deviation from its projected curve. But the direction of that shift wasn't random. It tilted inward just a little closer to Earth. Now, in astronomy, closer can still mean hundreds of millions of miles. But it was enough to set off a quiet stir. You could feel it ripple across the research community. Cautious emails, midnight video calls, late-night recalculations.
Everyone wanted to believe it was natural.
Maybe uneven gas release had given it a small push. Maybe dust jets from its surface had altered its motion.
That happens with comets all the time.
But this one had been stable before it vanished. And now it has changed. Across the Atlantic at the European Southern Observatory, a team led by Dr. Arduente began collecting new spectroscopic data. They focused on the strange dual tail that had become the defining mystery. One tail pointed away from the sun, bright and predictable. The other curved faintly toward the inner solar system, faint but measurable. It looked wrong, and yet it was perfectly symmetrical. The data showed something no one had seen before. The inner tail wasn't made of typical dust particles or sublimated gas. It contained high-density metallic ions, traces of nickel, titanium, and even vanadium. Materials rarely found in cometary tails, and almost never in that configuration. Nickel, they could explain. That had already been detected earlier, though still oddly abundant for an object this far from the sun. But vanadium?
That was something new.
It was a rare metal, the kind you'd find deep within planetary cores, or in the alloys used for spacecraft engines. When the findings were first shared in a closed network between observatories, A few scientists quietly exchanged glances on their screens. No one said the word aloud, but everyone knew what they were thinking. It couldn't be artificial, right? One of the senior researchers spoke up. Maybe it's just residual cosmic debris, something from the interstellar medium sticking to its coma. Another added softly, then why is it symmetrical? Silence followed. Meanwhile, the public began to take notice. Images of the comet flooded social media, its vivid green and gold halo turning up on headlines everywhere. Amateur astronomers started sharing videos comparing the object to an eye, a seed, even a lantern drifting through space. A few online theories went viral, some claiming it was an alien probe, others suggesting it was a natural phenomenon signaling an upcoming solar event. The truth was that no one knew. And for the scientists who did know something, the truth was harder to explain than the theories. Back in Arizona, a radio telescope array had begun pointing toward the region where Three-Eye Atlas now glowed brightest. They weren't looking for light. They were listening. Dr. Hughes, one of the engineers managing the feed, had grown accustomed to the usual background hum of cosmic static. The gentle hiss of stars, the murmur of distant pulsars, the faint whisper of the cosmic microwave background. But on one late shift, something shifted in the rhythm. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even distinct. Just a faint pulse hiding under the static, too rhythmic to be random, too quiet to be obvious. At first, he dismissed it as interference from the network's synchronization clock. But when he adjusted the timing, the pulse stayed.
3 short bursts. Pause. 3 short bursts.
He recorded it, time-stamped it, and sent it quietly to a colleague at another array in Australia. A few days later, he received a message back. We heard it too. For a while, they didn't tell anyone. The pulse didn't repeat in any pattern that could prove intent. It could have been natural. But both observatories recorded the same rhythm within the same window of observation, both directed toward the same coordinates. The location of Three-Eye Atlas. News of this leak eventually reached a small group of scientists involved with SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. They reviewed the signal logs and found something strange. The frequency of the pulse wasn't random. It hovered around 1.42 gigahertz, the hydrogen line. That number might not mean much to most people, but to astronomers, it's everything. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and the hydrogen line is the universal language of physics. It's the frequency many expect any intelligent civilization might use to communicate. So when those readings lined up, the chatter returned, cautious, hushed, impossible to ignore.
Could this be a coincidence?
Of course, space is vast and noisy. There are millions of sources that could mimic a simple pulse. But the timing of it, right after Three-Eye Atlas emerged from behind the sun, right when it was pointing one tail toward Earth, that coincidence felt too big to ignore. Days turned into weeks. The object continued its slow journey inward, crossing deeper into the solar system. Each new image showed subtle changes, faint shifts in its surface reflection, minor brightening and dimming patterns that didn't align with sunlight angles. The pattern began repeating roughly every 16 hours, the same rotation period first measured months before.
Only now the rhythm seemed
Different,
more structured.
almost like a beacon spinning through the dark. And still, no one could explain the green light. The color had deepened since re-emergence. Instead of a bright chemical glow, it now looked like something more natural, like bioluminescence, the kind you see in deep-sea organisms that drift through the dark. Smooth, breathing, alive. Some astronomers compared its glow curve to auroras, caused by particles colliding with magnetic fields. Others pointed out that Three-Eye Atlas's magnetic readings didn't match that explanation. Whatever was causing the glow, it wasn't behaving like known physics. A few scientists quietly wondered whether the light might not just be reflected, but generated. That it could be some kind of active process, chemical, mechanical, or
something else.
The European Space Agency, meanwhile, had authorized additional tracking from its JUICE probe, originally meant for Jupiter's moons, but capable of limited deep space observation. The probe caught a faint silhouette of 3I Atlas passing through a narrow band of solar light. It wasn't perfectly round anymore. Its outline showed uneven ridges, angles, small geometric protrusions that looked nothing like natural cometary shapes. Some dismissed it as imaging artifacts, lens distortion from extreme distance. But when the same features appeared in follow-up captures from the Hubble telescope, the idea became harder to brush aside. One scientist at NASA described it best. It looks like something built to survive the long dark between stars. Of course, publicly they never said that. The official line remained careful and calm. The object exhibits unique properties consistent with interstellar composition. But behind closed doors, the tone was changing. There was something about the way it moved, not just its steadiness, but its precision. Every small adjustment in trajectory seemed deliberate, as though it was responding to the gravity wells of planets ahead of time, predicting rather than reacting. That's not behavior we see from rocks or ice.
That's navigation.
And while the word mothership never appeared in any scientific paper, it began to appear elsewhere, whispered in interviews, hinted at in podcasts, speculated on in quiet conversations after long nights at the observatory. No one wanted to believe it.
Everyone wanted to.
The truth was simple. The more they studied 3I Atlas, the less sense it made. It didn't behave like a comet. It didn't look like a comet.
And it didn't move like one either.
The only thing anyone could agree on was this. Something was happening out there, something no one fully understood. And whatever it was coming closer. By the time 3I Atlas reached the inner edge of the solar system, it had become more than a scientific subject. It was a quiet obsession. Every major observatory, every deep space satellite, every research institute with a line of sight had turned its instruments toward it. For months, the world had been caught between fascination and unease. News anchors spoke softly when they said its name. You could feel it in the air. That strange combination of fear and wonder that comes only when the universe refuses to explain itself. It wasn't just an astronomical event anymore. It was cultural. Paintings of the green light appeared in art galleries. Composers wrote music inspired by its rhythm. People began meditating to slow recordings of its data streams. For a few minutes every night, millions of humans across the planet tilted their heads upward, staring into a darkness that felt newly alive.
And through all of this, the scientists kept working.
They didn't speak much to the media, not because they were hiding anything, but because they still didn't have words that fit what they were seeing. 3I Atlas kept moving, steady, deliberate, beautiful, its faint twin tails glowing like breath in the cold. And in its wake, the instruments began to register something else. At first, it was just a few faint electromagnetic fluctuations, small, nearly imperceptible hums that repeated at irregular intervals. Every observatory has background noise. That's part of astronomy. But these weren't random. They came in cycles lasting about 72 seconds each, fading and then returning again. Some called it coincidence. Others compared it to the hydrogen line signal the SETI researchers had picked up earlier. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses. When the data from all sites was combined, the pattern looked deliberate, not coded like language, but ordered enough to make you stop and wonder. And so the question returned, what if it's trying to talk? That idea was too dangerous for a press release, but behind closed doors, in quiet rooms lined with glowing monitors, it began to take root. A small working group was formed, a mix of astronomers, data analysts, linguists, and physicists from 5 different countries. Their task wasn't to decode anything. Officially, it was to analyze repeating signatures of non-random emissions from interstellar bodies. But everyone knew what they were really doing. They wanted to know if the universe was speaking. In a dim lab somewhere in California, a linguist named Dr. Imani Salim spent her nights listening to the hum of the data stream, running it through pattern filters, designed for human speech. Her headphones hissed softly as lines appeared on the screen. Rhythmic, pulsing, alive. She leaned back in her chair and whispered to herself, "It's almost breathing." At that same hour, across the ocean in Spain, a radio astronomer named Luis Ortega was staring at the same data, but inverted. He wasn't looking for words. He was looking for geometry. And what he found unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Each burst of energy, when mapped in three-dimensional coordinates, traced a shape.
Not random scatter more, but a spiral. Almost perfect, repeating itself in reverse every 72 seconds.
He cross-checked it with known physical models, solar wind interactions, magnetic field variations, plasma filaments. Nothing matched. The shape wasn't natural. He wrote one line in his logbook that night. If this is random, then randomness has learned how to draw. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the James Webb Space Telescope turned its gaze once more toward 3I Atlas. Its mirrors adjusted, its sensors humming softly in the cold of space. The first new images came back clearer than ever before. Sharp, deep, quiet.
And they showed something strange.
On the surface of the object, or whatever counted as its surface, there were regions that looked like they were glowing from beneath. Not reflective light, emissive light. The glow came from within, spreading gently across its curved structure like veins of heat under glass. For a long time, astronomers believed comets were just frozen relics, dirty snowballs drifting through space. But this didn't look like a relic. It looked like an engine slowly waking up. Of course, that word wasn't used in any report. It wasn't scientific to say something woke up. But when people saw those images, that's what they felt. Something about 3I Atlas had changed since it passed behind the Sun. Its orbit had tightened slightly, another few fractions of a degree toward the inner system. The twin tails, which had once curved gracefully in opposite directions, had begun to merge, slowly, subtly, like strands of light twisting together into one. As the days passed, the signal grew stronger, more consistent. Its rhythm is more precise. And then one morning in February, a team in Australia noticed something astonishing. When the signal was at its loudest, the brightness of 3I Atlas's green glow dipped by the tiniest measurable amount, almost like it was pulsing in sync with its own transmission. Light and sound moving together, a conversation in two frequencies.
At first, it seemed like a coincidence.
But then the team at the Very Large Telescope confirmed the same phenomenon. So did a group in Canada, then another in Japan. It was happening everywhere. Each pulse of the signal matched a subtle flicker in its light. People began to whisper, "It's talking in light!" Of course, the rational explanations came fast. Oscillations in CO2 emission, magnetic resonance, instrumental interference.
All reasonable, all possible.
But one by one, those explanations fell apart under closer analysis. The rhythm was too steady. The pattern is too structured. It didn't sound like chaos.
It sounded like an intention.
Still, no one dared say it outright. And yet the silence between those who studied it spoke volumes. Imagine those long nights at observatories. Monitors glowing green in dark rooms, coffee left cold on tables, people staring at the same patterns over and over, trying not to let their hearts race too fast. There was something ancient about the feeling, as if the stars themselves were reaching back for the first time. Meanwhile, back on Earth, a question began to rise in public spaces. What should we do if it is trying to talk? A message, after all, invites a reply. But how do you respond to something that might not think like you, move like you, or even exist in the same sense you understand life to exist? The SETI group debated it quietly. Some said no, don't respond. The signal might not even be meant for us. Others said silence would be arrogance. The universe had spoken, and humanity's first instinct should be to whisper back.
Eventually they made a decision.
Not a full message, not words, not symbols, nothing that could be misread. Just a single return pulse, mirrored at the same frequency, repeating 3 times, 72 seconds apart.
A simple echo.
They transmitted it using a global network of radio telescopes, coordinated, silent, unified. And then they waited.
Hours passed.
Then days, then weeks. The signal from 3i Atlas continued, steady and unchanged. It neither grew louder nor faded. It just was. Until one night something shifted. At exactly the same timestamp as the original return transmission, the hydrogen line signal stopped. For 72 seconds, the background of space went still. No hum, no pulse. Nothing. Then faintly, the signal came back. Not as 3 short bursts, but as 6. 6. Twice the original count. Some said it was a coincidence.
Others said it was confirmation.
But for the small group who had sent the message, it felt like the answer to a question humanity didn't know it had asked. A simple, quiet yes from across the stars. And at that moment, no one spoke. The universe had always seemed vast and cold, a canvas of silence. But as the faint green glow of 3i Atlas flickered across deep space telescopes, it felt, for the first time, less like emptiness and more like someone else was out there, looking back. When the 6 pulses came through, it was as if the universe had exhaled into every receiver on Earth. The signal wasn't louder or stronger. It was simply different. 6 steady beats, evenly spaced, unwavering, followed by silence. Then it repeated, again and again. For the teams that had been tracking 3i Atlas since the beginning, it was both exhilarating and terrifying. Because for all their planning, for all their data models and caution, they hadn't expected anything to change.
Space doesn't answer. It echoes, it reflects.
It murmurs. But it doesn't answer. Not until now. At first, no one wanted to say what they were all thinking. The official word from the International Astronomical Union was measured, almost painfully restrained. A deviation has been observed in the previously recorded hydrogen line emissions associated with 3i Atlas. The signal now consists of 6 repeating peaks per 72-second cycle. Further analysis is required. But among themselves, the scientists weren't that calm. Dr. Hughes barely slept that night. He sat in his dark control room long after the others had gone home, watching the oscillating waveforms roll across the screen. They looked simple, peaks and valleys rising and falling in a steady rhythm. But the longer he stared, the less random they seemed. It was as if each pulse carried weight, like the pause between them mattered more than the sound itself. 6 bursts, pause, 6 bursts. He whispered the pattern under his breath, like a word he was trying to remember. Half a world away, Dr. Salim, the linguist, was doing the same thing. She'd imported the data into an audio simulator, lowering the frequency to human hearing range. The result was eerie, a slow, low hum, rhythmic and calm, almost like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes, listening. There was no melody, no modulation, just repetition. And yet something in that repetition felt deliberate. In her notebook, she wrote one line, "It feels like acknowledgement." Meanwhile, at SETI headquarters, the discussion turned urgent. What now? Do they respond again? Do they wait? Do they even tell the world? There were arguments, of course. The cautious voices said no. The risks were too great, the data too uncertain. But a few believed silence would be the greater mistake. If they, or whatever it is, were listening, one researcher said quietly, then we've already started a dialogue whether we meant to or not. The question isn't should we respond, it's how. It was hard to tell who they referred to. Some refused to even use the word.
Others used it softly, reverently, like it was something sacred.
And as the debate went on, something else was happening. Every observatory trained on 3i Atlas noticed a subtle change in its glow. The color remained green, but it was no longer a uniform hue. There were gradients now, faint rings of brightness moving outward like ripples. The rhythm of those ripples matched the 6-pulse cycle. Light and sound were now fully synchronized. Dr. Ortega, still working in Spain, was the first to map the intervals between pulses. When he converted the timing ratios into spatial coordinates, the pattern formed an elegant geometry, a hexagon.
6 sides, 6 pulses.
Sixfold symmetry. It wasn't proof of anything, but it wasn't random either. By then, the story had already leaked. An independent journalist published an article titled "The Atlas Pattern, Are We Being Answered?" Within hours, it spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up. Talk shows debated it. Podcasts turned it into poetry. Half the world looked up that night, wondering if someone or something out there was looking back. And for the scientists, the pressure grew unbearable. Because behind every public fascination was a simple, impossible truth. They still didn't know what 3I Atlas was. The object was approaching perihelion, its closest point to the sun. And yet it wasn't behaving like any comet ever recorded. Instead of brightening and disintegrating as it neared the solar heat, it grew steadier, denser, its brightness curve flattening into an unnatural consistency. It wasn't melting, it was stabilizing. The chemical readings from its coma became stranger too. The carbon dioxide ratio held, but a new compound began to appear. Complex hydrocarbons, the kind often associated with organic chemistry. The same molecules found in meteorites that once seeded early Earth with the building blocks of life. One researcher in Japan compared it to amino acids forming in a cosmic petri dish. Another simply called it impossible. If it was alive, it wasn't life as we knew it. If it was mechanical, it wasn't made the way humans build machines. It existed somewhere in between, too natural to be technology, too deliberate to be nature. And so as it moved closer to the sun, the question deepened. What exactly was 3I Atlas? To calm the growing public tension, NASA and the ESA issued joint statements emphasizing that the object posed no threat to Earth. They highlighted the educational importance of studying interstellar phenomena, invited schools to join outreach programs, and assured everyone that science was doing its job. But privately, the data scientists were watching something unfold that defied their models. The trajectory had shifted again. Not a large change, just enough to suggest that 3I Atlas had slowed slightly. In space, slowing down isn't normal. Not for an object on a gravitational flyby. Unless it's interacting with something, or controlling its own motion. The change was small, almost too small to confirm, but consistent across 3 separate observatories. When the reports came in, no one said the word "breaking," but they all thought it. Dr. Hughes sat staring at the updated orbital path glowing on his screen, a thin white curve dipping ever so slightly inward toward the inner solar system. He exhaled through his nose and murmured, "You're not supposed to do that."
He wasn't speaking to the data. He was speaking to it.
The next few weeks blurred into sleepless nights. Teams around the world cross-checked readings, recalculated orbital mechanics, and compared spectra from infrared to ultraviolet. And then came another anomaly. Just as 3I Atlas reached its closest approach to the sun, its tail vanished.
Not burned away, not disintegrated. It simply stopped.
For a few hours there was nothing, no trail, no gas, no dust emission. Only the green core glowing brighter than ever, moving with unshakable calm through the blinding halo of sunlight. To the scientists watching, it looked as if the object had turned itself off. That's not something a comet can do. And yet, there it was, passing through the hottest region of its orbit without losing mass, without melting, without falling apart. When it emerged on the other side, it still shone. But now, faint golden flares pulsed from within, radiating outward like slow-motion lightning trapped inside glass. The 6-beat rhythm had changed again. This time came in pairs, 3 soft, 3 strong. Like a message repeating itself, this time with emphasis. Across the world, every telescope recorded it. The data streams are filled with identical waveforms. Then, something else happened. Something no one could have predicted. The signal didn't just transmit from 3I Atlas, it reflected back. From Earth, not from our transmitters, not from the SETI network, from the planet itself. Tiny electromagnetic echoes bouncing off the ionosphere, resonating at the same hydrogen frequency. Weak, almost invisible, but synchronized. It was as if the Earth had become a mirror, humming back the same song. The readings confirmed it. The hydrogen line frequency around our atmosphere was vibrating in tandem with the comet's emission. The timing was precise, the pattern identical. Nature, of course, can produce resonance. But this resonated with intention. Something had created a feedback loop, a link between us and it. And in the silence that followed, humanity, for all its noise, its questions, its restless wanting, grew still. The data analysts stopped typing. The telescopes kept tracking. The night sky stayed quiet, except for that one pulse, steady and green, drifting through space like a heartbeat shared between worlds. For the first time in history, it wasn't humanity sending a message into the stars. It was the stars sending one back.
No one could say exactly when the resonance began to touch Earth. It wasn't sudden. It didn't roar or flash.
It arrived like the softest echo of thunder you almost think you imagined. It started with the data, small distortions in the readings of instruments not even pointed at the sky. Deep space antennas, ocean sensors, radio beacons, all showing tiny fluctuations at the same hydrogen frequency. The same slow pulse.
6 beats, pause, 6 beats.
At first, it was easy to explain away. A stray solar storm, a calibration glitch, maybe even a coincidence. But as the hours turned to days, the pattern stayed.
And it spread.
Observatories from different continents began to see it not just in the skies, but in their own systems, buried in their signal logs, hidden in noise that shouldn't have been there. The most striking part wasn't its presence. It was its gentleness. The hydrogen pulse didn't interfere with communications, didn't disrupt instruments, didn't even register as dangerous. It was simply there, steady and calm, like a breath woven into the background of everything. The first public mention came from an engineer at a private satellite network. He posted a single line on an astronomy forum. Anyone else seeing repeating hydrogen bands that don't make sense? Within hours, others replied,
Yes, we thought it was a malfunction.
It's everywhere. That night, the conversation spread beyond the scientists. Amateur radio operators started noticing it too. A faint hum under the noise floor just below human hearing. If you tuned carefully enough, you could hear it, like the soft, rhythmic thrum of a heart beating through static. People began to call it the hum. Across the internet, recordings appeared. Hours of captured noise turned into sound files, slowed down and filtered. It didn't sound like music or speech, but it didn't sound like anything either. Some said it was soothing.
Others said it felt like being watched.
Meanwhile, in the observatories, the tone grew more analytical, but no less uneasy. The hydrogen resonance wasn't just a passive echo anymore. It was interacting. At low altitudes, ionospheric sensors showed small waves forming at the same intervals. High-altitude weather balloons detected faint electromagnetic ripples that matched 3I Atlas's frequency. And though most scientists still refused to call it communication, they had no other word for what it was. Something was responding. The object itself hadn't moved much, still maintaining its slow, graceful arc past the sun, still glowing green-gold in the depths of space. Its two tails had fused completely now into a single luminous stream, but its light had taken on a new quality, less comet-like and more structured, layered in subtle gradients that changed with time like shifting tides. At the Very Large Telescope in Chile, Dr. Ortega had begun to notice something strange in those gradients. When he processed the brightness curves into time series data, he found that each pulse wasn't identical. Each 6-beat pattern was unique. Tiny variations in amplitude, spacing, intensity, all mathematically distinct, but arranged within a range narrow enough to suggest intention. If it was random, it was the most beautifully precise randomness nature had ever produced. When he plotted those variations on a spectral map, a faint image began to emerge, one that stopped him cold. It wasn't a picture in the human sense, not a drawing or symbol. It was a topology, a shape made of light intensity over time, smooth, curved, symmetrical. It looked like a spiral, not unlike a galaxy seen from above, but with proportions that matched something else entirely, the double helix of DNA. He stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to trust what he was seeing. Then he sent the data to Dr. Salim in California, who ran it through a frequency correlation model. The result was unmistakable. The ratios between each pulse mirrored the relative spacing between nucleotide pairs in human DNA. Adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine. 4 repeating intervals, 6 pulses. It was too perfect, too specific, and yet it could have been a coincidence. The universe, after all, is full of repeating patterns, spirals, fractals, harmonics. Nature loves symmetry. But to see that pattern reflected in both biology and astronomy was
unnerving.
When the two scientists finally spoke on a secure call, their conversation was quiet, almost reverent. "You're sure the pattern isn't an artifact?" she asked. "I've checked 3 different instruments," he replied. "It's real." She was silent for a while. Then, almost in a whisper, "Do you think it's copying us?" He didn't answer, because part of him wondered if it was the other way around. Meanwhile, governments began to take notice. What had started as an obscure astrophysical curiosity was now a global phenomenon. The hum could be measured in communication satellites, aviation systems, even oceanic sonar arrays. It didn't disrupt anything, not really. It just existed everywhere, like a soft echo hiding in the seams of the world. Publicly, agencies dismissed it as harmless. Privately, they wanted to know what it meant. Teams were formed under names no one would ever read in the news. Physicists, linguists, psychologists, all working to interpret a pulse that refused to stop. One hypothesis emerged. The signal wasn't a message in words or math, but a resonance of attention. A cosmic heartbeat syncing with the frequencies of the planet that first sent its echo back. In other words, maybe it wasn't trying to say something.
Maybe it was trying to listen.
That idea frightened some and comforted others, because if it was listening, it meant it knew we were here.
And if it knew we were here,
what else might it understand? For a while, humanity existed in a strange calm. There were no new discoveries, no great shocks. Just the hum, always there, faint, steady, woven through the air. It became the background to daily life. Musicians sampled it. Sleep apps began using its rhythm to help people drift off. Farmers noticed their soil sensors picking up the frequency. It began to feel normal. And yet, the astronomers could tell something was changing. 3i Atlas was drifting again, not toward Earth this time, but upward, tilting its path out of the ecliptic plane. It was climbing slowly toward the northern regions of the solar system. That alone wasn't strange. What was strange was the timing. Every time it adjusted its trajectory, even slightly, the hum on Earth shifted, not in volume,
in emotion.
Of course, sound has no feeling, but anyone who listened closely swore they could hear something beneath the rhythm, a tone that felt heavier, softer, sometimes almost curious. The musicians described it as warmth. The physicists called it phase drift. The poets simply called it longing. And in those weeks, the world seemed to slow down. People began gathering outside under clear skies, staring at the same dim green spark that now glowed faintly near the constellation Hercules. Some swore they could feel it in their chests, that same 6-beat rhythm pulsing faintly beneath their heartbeat.
It was probably imagination.
But it didn't feel that way. Then, one quiet morning, something subtle shifted. The hydrogen pulse, which had been perfectly steady for weeks, changed tone, not in frequency, but in tempo. It began to slow. Each pulse drifted farther apart, stretching from 72 seconds to 74, then to 76. It was decelerating like a breath winding down. Across observatories, scientists began comparing data. Something about the signal's decay pattern matched the shape of 3I Atlas's orbit, specifically its changing velocity as it rose out of the solar plane.
As it slowed, so did the hum.
It was as though the object and the signal were breathing together, exhaling as one. And then, for the first time, something new appeared inside the pattern.
A seventh pulse.
Not regular, not symmetrical. A single quiet addition at the end of each sequence.
6 beats, pause, one more.
It didn't fit. It wasn't clean.
It wasn't supposed to be there.
But for the scientists who'd been following it for nearly a year, that lone extra pulse felt like something more profound than all the others combined. Because 6 meant repetition, a pattern, a system. 7 meant change. When the 7th pulse appeared, the world didn't notice right away. It was quiet, patient, almost respectful in its arrival, like a single drop falling into a still pond, making ripples that no one sees until much later. The observatories caught it first. Late at night, while the rest of the world slept, machines blinked with faint irregularities. Computers running long-term hydrogen spectrum monitoring logs started to register the extra beat, a gentle tick added to what had been a perfectly repeating cycle. At first, many assumed it was interference. Cosmic rays often distort readings.
It happens all the time.
But when it happened again, and again, and again, same length, same tone, same distance apart, something in the air changed. The 7th pulse had settled in. Dr. Ortega was the first to say it aloud in a video call that stretched deep into dawn. "It's intentional," he murmured. "It has to be."
No one wanted to agree.
Because agreeing meant admitting something they couldn't control or even understand had just changed the rhythm of space itself.
And yet, every telescope confirmed it.
Every instrument from Namibia to Hawaii to Chile to the Arctic. The hum now beat 7 times. No human-built system could find the reason. No algorithm, no physics model, no orbital prediction could explain why a distant interstellar object, one moving steadily away from the sun, had altered its signal in a way that every listener on Earth could feel. People began to talk about it again. The hum had never really gone away. It had just become background, a quiet friend in the static of daily life. But the 7th beat gave it new life. It made it emotional again. Musicians noticed it first. The extra beat made the rhythm uneven, not perfectly symmetrical, but strangely alive. Songs began to appear online, built around the new pattern, soft melodies looping in cycles of 7. Some said it sounded like a heartbeat hesitating between breaths. Farmers claimed their weather sensors now ticked differently. Pilots reported that radio static seemed to come in little waves like breathing, and deep-sea hydrophones, the kind used to listen for whales, began to pick up the same pulse reverberating through the oceans. Even if you didn't believe in patterns, it was impossible not to feel it. Some nights, when the sky was clear enough and the green light of 3I Atlas could be seen faintly glowing near Hercules, people swore they could hear the rhythm in their bones. 6 beats, a pause. Then that 7th one, soft, slow, like a hand brushing past your shoulder. The media tried to name it. They called it the visitor's song. For the scientists, it wasn't poetic.
It was terrifying.
Because if the pulse was somehow connected to the object, and if the pulse had changed, then that meant 3I Atlas had changed too. And the latest data confirmed it. Its path through space was still mathematically perfect, but its light signature, the green that once shimmered gently, had deepened into a cooler hue. Less vibrant, more emerald, threaded with soft streaks of gold. The brightness fluctuation matched the new pulse sequence exactly. In other words, it wasn't just sending it, it was it. The object itself had become the signal. Dr. Salim stared at the data on her screen for nearly an hour before speaking.
"It's not random," she said finally.
It's synchronized. She had compared the timing of the pulses to Earth's magnetic field variations. Somehow, impossibly, They matched within fractions of a second. Earth and Three-Eye Atlas were now beating together. The thought alone was enough to make her step outside into the crisp night air. Above her, the stars felt closer, sharper. The faint green shimmer near Hercules almost looked like it was watching back. She closed her eyes and listened.
No sound, not really. Just the hum of the night, the whisper of wind against her hair.
And yet, somewhere deeper than hearing, she felt it. The rhythm. 7 soft pulses spreading through her chest like a wave that never ended. It didn't feel mechanical.
It didn't feel cold. It felt alive.
Across the world, the same quiet realization began to take shape. The signal wasn't a transmission, wasn't trying to communicate across distance. It was doing something simpler and stranger. It was syncing. Like 2 pendulums swinging side by side until they moved together, Earth and the traveler from another star had somehow fallen into step. And with that synchronization came subtle shifts in the world. Ocean tides began showing faint but measurable anomalies, not higher or lower, just slightly delayed. Auroras near the poles pulsed in perfect rhythm with the hydrogen signal. Migratory birds started adjusting their routes earlier than predicted, flying in sweeping arcs that mirrored the shape of Three-Eye Atlas's orbit. No one could prove any of it was connected, but the timing was uncanny. When word reached the public, panic didn't come. Instead, something strange happened. Calm. People began gathering in open fields, in cities, on beaches, simply to look up.
It became a kind of ritual.
They would close their eyes, take slow breaths, and listen to the world around them. They didn't know it, but they were moving in sync with the same rhythm scientists were measuring through their instruments. Humanity had begun to align with a pattern that wasn't ours, and yet nothing felt threatening. The air didn't hum with fear. It hummed with connection. Somewhere between superstition and science, something in the human heart recognized the pattern as familiar. It reminded people of ocean waves, of wind through trees, of a heartbeat in quiet moments before sleep. It was ancient and new at the same time. Still, for the astronomers watching Three-Eye Atlas rise higher above the solar plane, curiosity turned into urgency, because the synchronization couldn't last forever. The object was moving too far now, too fast. Its green glow was dimming each week, fading back into the starlight. Soon it would be gone, and as it drifted, the signal began to shift once more. The pulses grew slower, not dying, just stretching, like a farewell being drawn out in slow motion. Somewhere deep in the desert, a small group of astrophotographers, the same ones who first captured its green shimmer months ago, gathered again to take their final images. They pointed their cameras toward the fading visitor and waited through the cold hours of night. When the image appeared on their screens, it looked like a painting, a swirl of faint emerald surrounded by gold and silver dust. But something new glowed faintly in the background, a line, thin and curved, stretching behind Three-Eye Atlas like a brushstroke of light. It wasn't a tail this time. It was a trail, a continuous thread, glowing softly at the exact intervals of the 7-beat pulse. It was as if the object was writing something across the sky. Not words, not code, but rhythm.
A motion that said, "This was where I passed."
And when the scientists mapped that faint line against a galactic coordinate grid, they found something remarkable. It pointed directly back toward the same region of Sagittarius where the original "wow" signal had been detected nearly 50 years ago. The visitor had come full circle, or maybe it was going home. Dr. Ortega stared at the trajectory on his screen and whispered to himself, "It's closing the loop." He didn't mean it as a metaphor, he meant it literally. Because the new orbit, when plotted precisely, curved in such a way that it intersected the solar plane again, not randomly, but at a point projected to align with Earth's orbit exactly 1 solar cycle from now.
In 12 years.
The message, if it was one, was clear. It wasn't leaving forever. The night it vanished, the sky felt too big. Even those who had never cared about stars before could tell something was missing. That faint green shimmer, that strange living heartbeat of light that had kept watchers company for months, was gone. Not faded, gone. The sky looked emptier. But space never erases what passes through it. It remembers in gravity and light, and 3i Atlas had left behind something to remember it by. The thin trail of luminescence that once curled across the dark was still visible for weeks after the main body had disappeared. It drifted slowly, changing shape with the pull of the solar wind, stretching, folding, bending until it resembled a soft spiral, curling back toward the sun. Scientists called it a residue, a reflection of charged particles interacting with cosmic dust. But artists, poets, and quiet dreamers called it a fingerprint. And the world, still synced to the fading rhythm of the 7-beat pulse, couldn't quite let it go. Radio operators, hobbyists, and scientists alike tuned their receivers every night, listening for something that might have stayed behind in the static. Some swore they could still hear it. A whisper, distant and slow, like a signal caught between moments. It was faint, but it was there. The hydrogen frequency, still humming at the same pitch, is just weaker now.
Almost like an echo bouncing across light years. Dr. Salim, who had spent months tracking 3i Atlas's every fluctuation, refused to believe it was just background noise.
Signal shouldn't persist without the source, she told her students. Unless the medium itself remembers. They laughed gently, not unkindly, just uncertain how to respond, because who could say if space remembered? And yet, deep down, everyone listening could feel something familiar. The silence between the beats felt alive. Weeks turned into months. Seasons shifted. The pulse slowed, stretched, softened, until one day it became indistinguishable from the natural hum of the galaxy itself. And still humanity listened. That was the thing about this object. It had changed how people looked at the sky. Before 3i Atlas, stars were distant. After it, they felt close, not as unreachable fires, but as quiet neighbors whose light might one day touch us in ways we couldn't measure. The idea that something might return from beyond, not hostile, not invasive, but simply curious, became part of humanity's shared rhythm. Children drew glowing green comets in their school notebooks. Writers spoke of the visitor's thread as a symbol of connection between all things. And for scientists, something else began to take root, a new branch of astronomy built not just on observation, but on attention, the kind that listens for whispers instead of flashes. They called it resonant cosmology. It wasn't about mapping galaxies or counting stars anymore. It was about rhythm, frequency, and coherence, about finding the patterns hidden between silences. And in those silences, strange alignments began to emerge. Across different observatories, faint signals were recorded, scattered across months, each one appearing at a slightly different wavelength, each one shaped like a faint echo of the old 7-beat pattern. No one could fully explain them. Some suggested they were solar phenomena. Others believed they were the natural after-effects of Atlas's trail interacting with cosmic rays. But a few believed otherwise. A paper quietly circulated through the scientific community titled Temporal Echo Hypothesis of Interstellar Memory. It proposed something radical, that 3i Atlas might have left behind not just particles or radiation, but a pattern embedded in space-time itself, like ripples in fabric that don't fade but change shape as the cloth stretches. The authors suggested that if such patterns were real, they could carry information, not as messages, but as resonance, accessible only when the observer's rhythm matched the source. In other words, you couldn't hear Atlas anymore. But if you learned to move with its rhythm, slowly, patiently, with breath and attention, you might still feel it. At first, the idea sounded almost mystical. But when they ran simulations based on the object's trajectory, composition, and pulse sequence, the data fit the model unnervingly well. Even years after the visitor had gone, its imprint remained measurable, in the smallest ways, in photon delays, in background radiation harmonics, in magnetic field fluctuations near the poles. The universe had memory, and Earth, somehow, was part of it now. Dr. Ortega sat in his office one late evening, the lights dim, only the glow of his monitor lighting his face. He wasn't young anymore. He had watched Atlas pass through their instruments, had lost sleep for months over data that defied every law he'd studied.
And yet, he still couldn't stop staring at that final image. The soft spiral of light.
Frozen in time, marking where the object had last been seen. He zoomed in until the pixels blurred into fog. And in that haze, he thought he saw something. Not words, not symbols, just a faint curvature, like the edge of a wave curling back on itself. A closed loop. He whispered to himself, "It's returning." He didn't mean it as superstition. He meant it as science. The trajectory had always implied it might. But the more he studied the data, the more he realized maybe it wasn't leaving and returning at all. Maybe it had never truly left. What if the visible comet was only part of a larger structure? What if the rest of it was something else entirely? Something that existed beyond the kind of matter we could see or measure? An electromagnetic architecture, a ship not made of metal but of frequency. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he didn't think of comets or signals or orbital mechanics. He thought of a hum. That hum had changed the course of his life. It had made him remember that science wasn't just equations. It was curiosity shaped into patience. And patience, he realized, was how the universe spoke. He leaned back and whispered softly, "You're still out there, aren't you?" On the other side of the world, a little girl named Anya sat with her father on a balcony in the cool air of late spring. She had been born the year Atlas appeared, and her parents had told her stories about it since she was old enough to look up. She held a small radio in her lap, tuning the dial gently. The static danced like waves. Her father smiled, knowing she was searching for that impossible hum. "Do you think it's still talking to us?" she asked. He looked at the stars, thousands of them, glimmering, ancient, and knew all at once. "Maybe it's not talking to us," he said. "Maybe it's talking with us." She nodded slowly, as if she understood something adults often forgot. Then she turned the dial one more time, and for a moment, between the crackles, came a faint pattern. 6 soft tones, a pause, then a 7th, barely there, like a sigh. Her father froze. She smiled.
"It came back," she whispered.
In the following weeks, similar reports appeared across the world. Amateur astronomers picking up faint rhythmic interference, exactly 7 pulses long, scattered across different radio frequencies. It wasn't strong and it wasn't consistent, but it was enough to make people look up again. The sky had found its rhythm, and somewhere deep beyond the orbit of Neptune, where sunlight fades to a thin whisper and dust drifts like ancient snow, a faint shimmer stirred once more. Not a flare,
Not a glow.
just motion, deliberate, patient slope, as though something vast and graceful was turning in its sleep. And in that silence, the hydrogen line flickered. One more time. 6 beats, a pause.
A 7th.
The song of the visitor was beginning again. By the time the signal returned, the world had almost stopped waiting for it.
Months had passed since anyone seriously believed the hum would come again.
The green light had faded, the last of the photographs had been archived, and even the most devoted observers had turned their attention back to other stars. Yet, one ordinary night, in a research lab tucked high in the Chilean desert, a quiet vibration rippled through the room. No one noticed it at first, not the hum itself, but the change in the silence. Then the computers began to shift, their readings forming soft, curved lines across the screens.
7 of them, just like before.
Each line rising and falling in a slow rhythm that felt almost alive. The astronomers on duty stood frozen, watching the pattern repeat again and again.
7 beats.
A pause, 7 more. And unlike before, this wasn't faint or scattered. It was clear, deliberate, and synchronized across 3 different instruments. The hum had returned. This time, it was stronger. Word spread fast. Within hours, observatories around the world began tuning their equipment to the hydrogen frequency, the same range where the original pulse had been found years ago. And everywhere they listened, the same thing happened. The same pattern, the same 7-fold rhythm, echoing through the cosmic background. It wasn't just one region of space anymore. It was everywhere at once. Some called it interference. Others called it impossible. But a small group of scientists, the same ones who had studied 3I Atlas from the beginning, believed they were hearing something far more significant. They met in secret online conferences, their faces tired but glowing with the quiet excitement of people who knew they were touching the edge of something vast. "It's not just repeating," said Dr. Ortega, now older, his voice trembling slightly. "It's modulating. There's information inside the gaps." Dr. Salim leaned closer to her screen. "Meaning? Meaning it's not a signal," Ortega said. "It's a language."
At first, people laughed at the idea. Language?
From what? A comet that had vanished years ago. But as the data continued to arrive, the laughter faded. The gaps between the pulses weren't random. They were arranged in ratios that mirrored natural sequences found in planetary orbits. Mercury to Venus, Earth to Mars, Jupiter to Saturn. The hum, it seemed, was built from the rhythm of the solar system itself. And hidden inside it was something even stranger. Small frequency shifts that matched the timing of the planet's rotations.
Almost like
it was syncing with us. Across the world, radio telescopes confirmed the same pattern. It wasn't localized. It wasn't directional. It was as if the entire solar system had become one giant receiver, and the message was being transmitted through space itself. Governments held closed-door meetings. NASA and ESA issued public statements assuring everyone that it was simply a recurring interstellar anomaly. But even their own scientists knew the truth. This was not random noise. The hum had changed. It was growing warmer.
more structured, almost human in its pacing.
And every few days new variations appeared, subtle shifts that resembled pauses, inflections, even cadences. Linguists began running the data through speech pattern models and were stunned by what they found. The waveform mirrored not mechanical repetition, but conversation.
Not speech exactly, Bahi, but communication.
The voice of the universe, learning how to talk back. Meanwhile, in classrooms and living rooms, people were learning to listen. You could download the hum now. An entire global project had made it public. Children would play it before bed, letting the 7 beats lull them to sleep. Meditation guides used it to help people relax. Musicians wove it into songs. Something about it made people calm. Even animals seemed to react. Dogs tilting their heads, whales adjusting their calls, birds shifting their migration patterns ever so slightly. The earth itself was resonating. Some said it was psychological.
Others said it was spiritual.
But one quiet morning, satellites orbiting Mars recorded something that made everyone stop pretending it was just a coincidence. Because the red planet had begun to hum back. The signal came from the northern hemisphere. A slow, low-frequency vibration matching the rhythm of the original pattern, but inverted, as if echoing. The wavelengths were too structured to be seismic, too consistent to be magnetic. The hum was replying. For the next several weeks, scientists around the world watched in awe as the exchange continued. Earth's atmosphere began resonating faintly. Not audibly, but detectably, like a gentle pulse through the ionosphere. The hum from space would arrive, and then, hours later, the planet itself would answer with a faint mirror signal. It was as if the entire solar system had entered a conversation.
Nobody knew who started it or who was listening.
In the midst of it all, the old debate about 3I Atlas reignited. What if it hadn't been a comet at all, but something far beyond human understanding? A vessel, a probe, a messenger. Something ancient and patient enough to teach through resonance rather than words. If that were true, then maybe it hadn't left. Maybe it had simply woven itself into the space around us, transforming into the song we were now hearing. Meanwhile, in a quiet coastal town in Iceland, a boy named Eli sat by his window with a small shortwave radio he had built with his grandfather. The boy loved listening to space. Every night he tuned in to the frequencies others ignored, the ones filled with static and whispers. But tonight felt different. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if it were carrying something invisible. He turned the dial, and there it was, 7 soft tones rising and falling like waves. He closed his eyes and began to hum along. To his surprise, the static shifted. The pattern bent ever so slightly to match his rhythm. He stopped, and the hum paused too.
He started again, slower, and it followed.
It was like singing with something enormous and unseen. He ran downstairs to tell his grandfather, who laughed softly and said, "Maybe it likes your voice." But when they returned to the radio, the hum had already faded. Still, that night, Eli dreamed of light. Soft green light swirling above oceans, dancing through forests, brushing across the rooftops of every sleeping city. In his dream he heard a whisper, not in words but in feeling. "You are not alone." Back in the scientific community, a discovery unfolded that would change everything. Dr. Salim, working late one night, noticed that the hydrogen line frequency was fluctuating in exact sync with global internet traffic. Not randomly, precisely. The hum was pulsing stronger when humans were most active online and quieter when they slept. It was adapting to human activity, listening to our patterns,
learning us.
She sat in silence for a long time, staring at the data. The thought crossed her mind. Absurd, impossible, and yet undeniable. It's trying to communicate through us. She ran her models again, overlaying the hum's modulations on human communication networks, and the result made her heart stop. The hum's frequencies aligned perfectly with certain global time zones, almost like it was tracing the rhythm of consciousness across the planet. Not random, intentional. When she published her findings, the paper spread quietly across research circles under the title Cognitive Resonance, a hypothesis of planetary feedback. And with it came one haunting question that no one could quite answer. If 3i Atlas was intelligent, what did it want? Some said it was observing. Some said it was awakening. Others whispered that maybe it wasn't an it at all, but a they. A collective intelligence moving not through bodies or machines, but through energy and vibration. Something that didn't need to matter the way we did. A consciousness made of rhythm. Maybe that was why its movements had always been steady, why it never swerved or burned out. Maybe it had been gliding, not traveling.
Listening, not watching.
Waiting for the right moment when humanity's own signals, our endless chatter of radio waves and light, became loud enough to answer back. Maybe that moment was now. In a global broadcast, scientists from NASA and ESA finally addressed the phenomenon publicly. The message was short, calm, and careful. We are witnessing a synchronized cosmic event unlike any in recorded history.
It is real, it is measurable.
And it is ongoing. They didn't call it aliens. They didn't call it artificial. But the unspoken truth lingered in every pause. Something was communicating across the solar system, and we were part of the dialogue. News channels replayed the announcement endlessly. Social media is filled with people humming the 7 tones. Musicians began to remix them into lullabies, orchestras, and choirs. Even the most skeptical found themselves humming along, unable to resist the pull of that cosmic melody. And in that shared moment, across languages, borders, and beliefs, something remarkable happened. The world fell silent,
not in fear,
but in listening, because for the first time in history, the universe wasn't just a backdrop of stars. It was speaking, and we were listening. It began with silence, not the absence of sound, but a pause that felt like the world taking a breath. After weeks of humming, the cosmic rhythm suddenly stopped. Every telescope, every satellite, every receiver tuned to the hydrogen line went quiet at the same time. For a few moments, people thought it was a glitch. Maybe a power surge, maybe interference. But then the quiet lingered, and for the first time in months, the universe sounded empty again. Across the world, researchers sat staring at flat lines on their monitors, the signal that had tied the solar system together, gone. Dr. Salim sat in her lab, headphones still pressed to her ears, listening to nothing. The silence felt heavy, almost physical, and then she whispered what everyone else was thinking. It left. But did it? Within hours, strange reports started to surface. Not from observatories or deep space antennas, but from ordinary people. A farmer in Argentina swore he could hear faint vibrations through the metal walls of his barn. A pilot over the Atlantic said his instruments flickered in 7-beat intervals. A musician in Berlin uploaded a video of her piano strings trembling ever so slightly between notes, resonating to a frequency she couldn't hear. The hum was no longer out there.
It was here.
Governments scrambled to understand what was happening. Scientists tested local electromagnetic fields and found something astonishing. The Earth's magnetosphere was oscillating in microscopic pulses, perfectly timed to the hum's old pattern. It wasn't a signal being sent anymore. It was being carried. Across oceans, forests, and deserts, the very air had begun to vibrate with the faintest trace of rhythm. It was too subtle to detect with the human ear, but sensitive instruments picked it up everywhere, even underground. Seismographs showed rhythmic fluctuations in the planet's crust. Soft, harmless waves that echoed through the mantle like a slow heartbeat. The world had become an instrument. Dr. Salim met with the team again, Ortega, Nakamura, and the younger scientists who had grown up listening to the hum as children. They gathered in the observatory conference room, the walls lined with years of printed data, every pulse and pattern meticulously logged.
This isn't a broadcast anymore, Salim said, her voice low.
It's diffusion.
It's inside our environment.
Nakamura leaned forward. Are you suggesting the signal has
merged with Earth's natural systems?
Salim nodded. The magnetosphere, the ionosphere, even the crust. It's resonating through all of it.
Like it's embedding itself into the planet.
Ortega rubbed his eyes. Then it's not trying to reach us anymore.
No, she replied softly. It's already here.
For weeks, people across the globe began noticing subtle changes. The auroras brightened even at lower latitudes. Ocean tides moved with an almost musical regularity. Migrating animals shifted their routes as if following an unseen compass. And something even stranger, sleep patterns. Doctors noticed that people everywhere were sleeping deeper, longer, and reporting vivid dreams of green light, calm oceans, and soft sound. None of it is frightening, just peaceful. It was as though something had gently tuned the collective rhythm of humanity into a shared dream. One researcher in Canada ran a study comparing the global pulse with human brainwave data. The results were staggering. The hum's frequency matched the theta range of the human mind, the same state we enter when we dream. It wasn't just on the planet, it was in us. The United Nations convened an emergency summit, not out of fear, but out of necessity. World leaders, scientists, philosophers, and spiritual figures gathered to discuss what was now undeniable. The hum had integrated itself into the global environment. Every attempt to block or isolate it failed. It passed through walls, oceans, even shielding built to stop cosmic radiation. It was omnipresent yet gentle, a constant, invisible presence woven into the rhythm of life itself. Some called it alien, some called it divine, but everyone agreed on one thing: it felt intentional. And so humanity made a decision that would have been unthinkable just years before. Instead of resisting, they would respond. Dr. Salim and her team were asked to lead the project, codenamed Resonance 1. The idea was simple: create a structured sound that could be transmitted back through the same frequency, not as a broadcast, but as a global symphony. Every observatory, radio tower, and communication array on Earth would join in. Together, the planet would send a single reply. They worked for months to design it, Musicians joined physicists. Poets worked with engineers. The hum was mapped to musical scales, translated into sound waves that mirrored natural cycles. Heartbeat, ocean tides, planetary rotation. It wasn't just science anymore. It was art. When the day came, billions watched the broadcast. From the deserts of Chile to the frozen plains of Siberia, antennas aligned. The hum of Earth was ready to speak. At precisely midnight Greenwich time they began.
A deep, slow tone rolled across the sky. Warm, steady, human.
The sound was modulated with encoded patterns representing language, mathematics, and emotion, the universal symbols of intelligence. For 12 minutes the Earth sang. The sound moved through the atmosphere, past the magnetosphere, into the silent void beyond. And then the hum returned. It wasn't louder. It wasn't brighter. It was different. For the first time, the pattern changed completely. Instead of 7 pulses, there were 12, arranged in 2 groups of 6, separated by a pause that felt like a breath. When the spectrogram was translated into visual data, it formed an unmistakable shape, a spiral, the same spiral seen in galaxies. The same shape is found in seashells, hurricanes, and DNA. It was a reply, elegant, mathematical, and profoundly familiar. Humanity had reached out.
And something had reached back.
The following weeks were a blur of study, excitement, and quiet awe. The new signal was rich with structure, frequencies interlaced like chords, harmonics rising and falling in deliberate progression. It wasn't random and it wasn't noise. Computer models revealed repeating golden ratio intervals embedded within the waveform, the same proportions that define the structure of living things, from sunflower seeds to human bones. The universe was speaking in the language of life itself. And as data poured in, another discovery left everyone speechless. Hidden in the lower harmonics, frequencies far below human hearing, was a pulse identical to Earth's natural resonance, the Schumann frequency. The hum was reflecting our planet's own voice back to us, perfectly synchronized. It was as if the cosmos was saying, "I hear you." The world changed overnight. Wars halted. Nations collaborated. People gathered in parks, rooftops, and quiet beaches just to listen to the gentle frequency drifting through the air. It wasn't something you could hear with your ears, but you could feel it. A warmth behind the ribs, a calmness in the bones.
Religions found new unity.
Scientists found new humility. Humanity found silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was shared. News outlets called it the Great Quiet. Psychologists called it global coherence.
And the people, well, they just called it peace.
As months passed, astronomers began to detect a faint shimmer in the outer solar system. At first, it looked like cosmic dust, a faint green glow barely visible against the darkness. But as telescopes focused in, they realized it was moving. Slowly, steadily with purpose. The coordinates pointed to a trajectory that curved past Jupiter, then angled toward the space between Saturn and Uranus. The glow pulsed softly like breathing. Every few days, its rhythm aligned with Earth's hum. And every time it did, the auroras brightened again. Soft waves of green light stretching from pole to pole, as if the planet were exhaling with joy. People began to call it the return. Dr. Salim stood once more at her observatory, looking through the glass ceiling at the night sky. The data scrolling across her monitor showed the object's path. Slow, graceful, deliberate. She whispered quietly to herself. "You're coming back, aren't you?" No one answered, of course. But deep in the stillness, she could almost feel it. A presence older than time, patient as the stars, moving closer, not out of conquest, but curiosity. Whatever 3i Atlas was, comet, vessel, or something beyond both, it had found us. And in finding us, it had changed everything. It is said that endings don't always arrive with sound or light. Sometimes they come softly, like dawn. The return of Three-Eye Atlas was not sudden. It was patient, measured, almost considerate.
As if it wanted us to be ready.
For weeks, the green shimmer on the edge of the solar system grew brighter, not with the harsh glare of energy, but with something gentler, steadier, like the slow pulse of a sleeping star. Astronomers around the world began to map its new trajectory. It wasn't following the hyperbolic escape path anymore, the one that would have flung it forever out of the sun's reach. Instead, its orbit had subtly curved, threading itself into a wide loop that would bring it back through the outer planets in a few decades. Not a straight escape, a return path. The news spread slowly like a whisper. The object that had once been destined to leave was choosing somehow to stay within reach. No one called it a comet anymore.
No one called it a ship either.
It had become something in between, a quiet companion of the sun, drifting through the solar system like a wandering thought that didn't want to be forgotten. By now, the hum had softened into a steady undertone in the world's data. Still measurable, still real, but no longer disruptive. It had settled into the background, syncing perfectly with the Schumann resonance, as if Earth and the sky had found harmony. People had learned to live with it. In cities, the low vibration hummed through the concrete unnoticed. In forests, it moved through the trees, making the leaves tremble just slightly in unison. And at night, when the world fell still, some swore they could hear it faintly. Not with their ears, but with something deeper, some quiet organ of perception buried beneath thought. It wasn't a noise. It was a feeling. A reminder that we were not alone. Dr. Salim has grown older now. Her hair silvered, her voice slower, but her eyes were the same, calm and searching. She still came to the observatory every morning before sunrise. She no longer brought computers or teams or press. Just herself and a cup of tea, watching the faint line of stars fade as the horizon brightened. The hum had become part of her life, like breathing. She didn't study it anymore. She simply listened. That morning, the monitors flickered softly as the latest readings came in. Three-Eye Atlas was passing near Neptune again. A faint blip of light, far from Earth, but not gone. She smiled quietly. It kept its promise, she murmured. Because that was what it felt like. A promise kept that whatever it was, it would not leave us forever. In the years that followed, children born after the hum began to grow up beneath its rhythm. They didn't find it strange. It was simply part of the world they knew. Teachers used it to explain resonance, music, and math. Artists used its pattern to paint. Musicians built songs around its slow cadence. Farmers swore their crops grew stronger when they played recordings of the hum at night. No one really remembered the fear anymore, only the wonder. And with that wonder came a quiet change in humanity itself. We slowed down. Cities dimmed their lights to see the stars again. Nations redirected funds from weapons to research. The first permanent outpost on Mars was named Harmony Base. And at the heart of it all, deep in the Andes, stood a tall, slender observatory known as the Resonance Tower, built not to watch the skies for danger, but to listen. It was said that if you stood beneath it at night, when the winds fell still, you could hear the hum gently threading through the air like the low note of a cello, endless and calm. People would come there from every corner of the world, scientists, poets, dreamers, the lost and the hopeful, to stand in silence and listen. No one claimed to understand what Three-Eye Atlas truly was anymore. They only knew it had left something behind, something that changed how we understood connection. One day, late in her life, Dr. Salim returned to the Resonance Tower. The night was clear, and the sky was full of quiet stars. The hum was steady, softer now, more like breath than sound. She sat down on the stone terrace and looked up at the band of light cutting through the darkness. Somewhere in that line, among the frozen worlds and drifting dust, she knew Three-Eye Atlas was still there, moving, patient, listening. She thought of the first time she saw it, that tiny bright green speck that shouldn't have existed. The confusion, the fear, the long nights of study, all of it had led here, to a kind of peace she hadn't known she'd been seeking.
She whispered, "We heard you."
And you heard us. The stars shimmered faintly in response. Maybe just her eyes playing tricks. Maybe not. Then she closed her eyes and rested her hand on the cold ground, feeling the faint vibration through the stone. Steady, rhythmic, kind. A planet breathing.
A universe humming.
A connection that didn't need words. And so 3i Atlas continued its silent journey. Far beyond the reach of human eyes, it drifted between the outer planets, trailing soft light and metallic dust that glimmered like fireflies in the dark. Sometimes, when the light of the sun hit it just right, its green glow would reflect off Saturn's rings, painting faint ripples of color across the frozen world. Probes orbiting near Jupiter occasionally caught faint bursts of electromagnetic resonance, rhythmic, harmonic, like chords from an unseen instrument. They were logged, studied, archived, and left without conclusion. But every pattern is always resolved back to one simple ratio.
7:12.
The same structure of the hum, the same rhythm Earth had sent. There were new theories, of course. Some said it was a kind of probe, ancient, self-sustaining, built to drift between star systems, collecting data about civilizations that reached a certain level of awareness. Others believed it was natural, a chunk of interstellar ice and metal whose strange chemistry just happened to resonate with electromagnetic fields in perfect harmony with Earth's. And a few, quietly, still thought it was something else entirely.
A visitor.
Not from another world, but from another time. Whatever the truth was, 3i Atlas had given humanity something more valuable than proof. It has given us perspective. The sense that the universe wasn't just a cold, indifferent void, but a place where harmony was possible. Decades passed. The hum faded into the background of everyday life. Humanity spread across the solar system. Small colonies on Mars, research stations orbiting Europa, a telescope array drifting near Pluto. But wherever humans went, they carried recordings of the hum. Some said it helped them sleep. Some said it reminded them of home. And one night, many years later, a young astronomer stationed on Mars noticed something curious. On her monitor, a faint green light appeared just beyond the orbit of Neptune. Not bright,
Not suddenly.
just a gentle shimmer. She smiled, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe it was nothing, a reflection, an artifact, a trick of dust. But she leaned closer anyway and whispered, almost unconsciously, "Welcome back." The data feed flickered for a second, a single spike of resonance, perfectly timed to the pulse of the hum. Then it vanished again into the stars.